Welcome to Inclusion Strengthens California, our virtual career panel. My name is Sharon Comas, and I'm the EEO officer for the Department of Parks and Recreation. I have the honor of introducing our moderator for today's panel, who is Kim Rutledge. Since 2022, Kim has been the Deputy Director of the Office of Legislation and Communications at the California Department of Rehabilitation. She's overseen all external affairs for the nation's largest vocational rehabilitation and independent living programs. She has a long career as a nationally recognized leader in the disability community that includes working at the California Department of Social Services, where she was a policy director of the nation's largest program that provides in-home care to older adults and people with disabilities. Prior to that, she was the assistant legislative director at the United Domestic Workers of America, AFSCME, Local 3930, which represents nearly 200,000 in-home caregivers throughout California. She also worked on disability policy at the National Academy of Social Insurance in Washington, D.C., and the Disability Community Resource Center in Los Angeles. And prior to that, Rutledge also had a career as a newspaper reporter and an editor at several well-known publications in California. Born with a significant physical disability, Kim Rutledge has been in a wheelchair since she was a toddler. Using that, this lived experience informs her work, and we are very thankful that she has joined us as our moderator today. Thank you and welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Sharon, so much. So again, my name is Kim Rutledge from the Department of Rehabilitation, and I am really privileged today to moderate this panel where you're going to hear from four very unique and very dedicated state employees about their pathway to state service as individuals with disabilities from a variety of state departments, and really how they navigated their personal and professional challenges and the resources and strategies that they have used themselves in maintaining and advancing their career with the state of California while having disabilities. Without any further introduction, I want to go right to our very first panelist, Therese Taylor. Therese is a business analyst in the Project Management Office for the Office of Energy Infrastructure and Safety, where she assists with schedule management and project work streams. Therese has a bachelor's degree in business, real estate, and land use affairs from Sacramento State University and was on the pathway to becoming a real estate broker when she suffered a massive stroke to her spinal cord 15 years ago that left her paralyzed from the neck down. In 2019, Therese realized a personal goal by getting her MBA, and in 2022 entered state service through the LEAP program, which is the Limited Examination and Appointment Program, an alternate examination and appointment process for the recruitment and hiring of individuals with disabilities into California state service. So welcome to our panel, Therese. Really happy to have you here today, and just want to start out by having you talk a little bit about your professional track before you acquired a disability. Can you share the steps that you had taken personally and professionally as you transitioned to a new career after you acquired a disability?
Sure. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Kim, for having me. Just like she said, I'm a business analyst in our project management office for the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety. I assist in our schedule management and our project work streams. I do have my bachelor's degree in business, real estate, and land use affairs from Sac State. I've worked in restaurants, I've worked for EDD, and I also worked for a real estate agency. That was very much the real estate was very much the path I was going down, and I wanted to be a broker. 2009, I suffered a massive stroke to my spinal cord that left me paralyzed from the neck down. Over the next few years, I spent an immense amount of time in physical, occupational, and exercise therapy. And also during that time, I decided to reevaluate my life and set goals for myself. One of those goals was trying to gain back as much strength and functionality as possible, which was definitely not easy, and I did do my best. But I could say that I'm happy with the progress that I've made. Another one of those goals was to get my MBA, which I was able to do in 2019 through the University of Phoenix. And finally, I really wanted to get back into the workforce, and I was able to do so through the LEAP program, which we'll speak to next. But I'm happy to be here with you.
All right, can you tell us a little bit more about the LEAP program and specifically how you first heard about it and how you were able to access it in order to become a state employee?
Yes, so for anyone who doesn't know, LEAP stands for the Limited Examination and Appointment Program. It's an alternate examination appointment process for the recruitment and hiring for people with disabilities, as Kim said earlier. I have several family members that work in state service, so they're the ones who directed me towards this program. My personal experience, it was fairly simple. I created a CalCareers account, and from there, I found my nearest Department of Rehabilitation. For me, the nearest location was Elk Grove. I brought down my medical records. I believe a doctor's note will suffice as well, just for confirmation of disability. I filled out some additional paperwork, and I would say I was certified in the next few days. And from there, I was able to take LEAP exams on the CalCareers website, as well as apply for jobs.
Great, great. So what did you learn through this process about your rights as a state employee with a disability, especially when it comes to the reasonable accommodations that all employees with disabilities in the state have an opportunity to access?
I learned that I had options, that I'm not limited to just one form of exam taking. I also learned that in the event that I were to find a job, that they were able to assist me with reasonable accommodations. For me personally, it was adaptive equipment to help me with my job. I'm the chairperson for our Disability Advisory Committee, and we have a newsletter that we put out, and we did a whole feature on adaptable equipment that consisted of ergonomic keyboard and mouse, a standing desk, and a screen reader. So most departments are able to get you what you need. You just have to request it.
Yeah, that's great. And definitely a good advantage to working for the state is we have these processes in place to be able to do that.
Mhm.
So my final question for you, Therese, is what advice would you give other individuals who may be on the fence about working for the state or may not know how to start the process, specifically individuals who have disabilities?
Give yourself time and to reevaluate your life, go at your own pace, take a page from my book and make a list of goals and things you want to achieve, and know that there are resources out there. You just have to do your own research. And if you do have any questions, reach out to the department that you're applying for, or reach out to the Department of Rehabilitation, and they'll be able to help you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your experience. I think that for a lot of people, the LEAP process in particular can be a little bit daunting to get started, but it's there, and it's good to know that people have success and move forward in their careers with the state that way. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your story today.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to our next panelist now, who is Ben Parrish. So first of all, I'll tell you all a little bit about Ben. He is an engineering geologist with the California Geological Survey, which is part of the Department of Conservation. Ben completed his bachelor's in geology at Sacramento State University in 2012. Following this, he earned his master's in economic geology at the University of Nevada, Reno in 2014. He then worked as a mine geologist in Nevada at underground and surface gold mines. In 2017, he worked for the California Department of Water Resources, conducting engineering geology studies at state water project facilities, including the Oroville Spillway and the California Aqueduct. So at this time, let's bring on Ben.
Hi, Kim. Nice to meet you. Pleasure
Nice.
to be here.
Glad to have you here today, Ben. So
you.
we're just going to ask you a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what drew you to state service?
Sure. So you covered kind of my education and work history. I'm a Sacramento native. I grew up in Sacramento all my life, and then, you know, did a little time in Nevada and then came back. I guess one of the biggest pushes for me towards public service is I am also an Eagle Scout. So I've always been drawn to public service of some kind, whether it be through volunteering efforts, or now state service. So what really drew me to work for the state was sort of that opportunity to give back and work for the people.
Great, great. So can you tell us a little bit about your disability
Yeah,
and how that intersects with your work at the Department of Conservation?
certainly. So I've had Crohn's disease for over 20 years now. I was diagnosed when I was 13 during my freshman year of high school. Um, and it sort of started like many of these irritable bowel disease uh, stories start, where I just started to get sick, and it took 6 months to a year to get diagnosed. Missed a lot of school and lost a lot of weight during that time. Um, and then, was able to transition and work through high school and college once I figured out how to navigate having this disability. And then in 2023, I ended up having to have surgery for Crohn's disease in 2022. And then in 2023, I developed celiac disease, which, for those that don't know, is an autoimmune response to the gluten protein found in wheat and barley and rye. And so, as far as navigating working for the state with those disabilities, I've been able to work through the reasonable accommodation program to get kind of accommodations and help for when I have to do field work for my job as a geologist for the state.
Great. So I think that, for a lot of people who are not deeply steeped in the world of disability, we oftentimes people think of disabilities as very visible physical things. Seeing somebody with a wheelchair, or someone who's blind with a white cane, or someone who is deaf, or something like that. And I think hidden disabilities, for a lot of people, there's some stigma involved sometimes, and there's some, people who don't necessarily see it as a disability, even though it clearly is. So what kind of challenges have you experienced in the workplace as a person with a hidden disability?
Sure. So I think the challenges that people with hidden disabilities face are pretty similar to those that don't have hidden disabilities. As far as their daily life goes, they can be hindrances to how they interact with their surroundings, accessibility and awareness issues, on top of the sort of the nature of their disability. I think it can not only be a challenge for the individual, but it's also difficult for others to recognize and acknowledge the hidden disability, because they may not understand it. And so it can lead to a lack of empathy, or sometimes frustration or impatience from people that may just not understand.
Right, right.
Yeah, and I think, to add on that, colleagues, management, and members of the public, they just may not be aware of some of those challenges or the severity of that disability. And that sort of leads into this lack of understanding or compassion. As far as in the workplace, it can be challenging to sometimes maintain the same work ethic or standards as some of your peers without disabilities. And that's, of course, dependent on the nature of the disability. Mine in particular can lead to a lot of fatigue, sometimes when I'm in a flare, absences and things like that. So deadlines may have to be adjusted. And that touches on what you said about the stigma at sometimes. There's sort of this pressure And so it may be a pressure to not even report the condition. You can find that sometimes isolating. It can lead to fear of being passed over for promotions or stuck in your job. And one final thing is when I worked in mining, I was sort of constantly in fear of being able to work, well enough to work and not showing any signs of weakness for fear of losing my job, even though there is job protections. And I will say at the state, I don't have that sort of fear, and that's a great benefit for working for the state.
Yeah, that definitely is. There's, as I've mentioned with our previous panelist, a lot of protections and accommodations in place, no matter what the disability is. So, do you have any advice or strategies for other employees who are in state service and maybe have non-visible disabilities?
Yeah, I think my biggest piece of advice is to give yourself some grace when you're a person with any sort of disability. In my case, it's someone with an invisible or hidden disability. Um, you know, and you don't want to be afraid to ask for help when you need it. I think personally, it took me too long to sort of realize that it was okay to ask for help or okay to look into the reasonable accommodation process. Um, when I was in high school and college, I feel like there was much more lack of awareness about disabilities in general or hidden disabilities in particular, and I didn't know what to ask or who to go to find out that sort of information. And so since being at the state, the reasonable accommodation process has been very helpful, and I've tried to make it more of a dialogue when I do have to ask for those things. Like, well, what things are available? What resources are out there, and how can we make my ability to do the job a little bit better? I think the state as an employer wants to give you the tools to be able to do the best you can in your job. And so that's most of my advice.
Yeah. I have a question that wasn't necessarily something that we brought up earlier, but for yourself, being someone who has lived with this non-visible disability, I think anymore we call them more non-visible than hidden, but someone who's lived with this non-visible disability for a number of years now, at what point did you see yourself as a person with a disability?
So the nature of my disease is sort of autoimmune, meaning, well, and sort of with that is periods of flare and remission. And so there are times when I feel, uh, as if I don't have a disease or the symptoms are pretty minor. And so I think for a long time, I didn't feel as if I had a disability or I didn't identify because of that invisible or non-visible aspect, and that there were periods that I felt okay and then periods where I felt worse. It wasn't until 2019 up until 2022 when I had my surgery, I had a pretty significant flare of Crohn's disease that I accepted and sort of felt that yes, this is a lifelong condition that can cause periods where you may need disability services or more help than you would have before.
Right. Well, I appreciate you being able to share your story. I think that, we don't often hear from people often enough that have non-visible disabilities. And I think that for those of you who are on this webinar today, it's important to remember that you may have colleagues or people that you work closely with on a regular basis who may have a disability and you may not even know it. So I really, Ben, I just really want to commend you for, coming out about that, because I think that I've lived my whole life with a very visible disability, but I think that there is kind of a coming out process of sorts for people who have non-visible disabilities. And I just really appreciate you being open and honest and sharing your story, because I think it's so important for all of us to remember that the definition of disability goes way beyond what we can see. So thank you so much for being here today and for sharing with everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And I'll just add, on that advocacy side of things. My door is open if anybody doesn't feel ready to come out about their invisible disease or disability, or if they just want to talk. I'm sort of an open book on that realm. So thank you for having me, Kim, and I appreciate the conversation we had.
And I appreciate you saying that you're an open book. I think that it's important for those of us, whatever our disability is, who are brave enough to be out about it, that it's important to be able to share and be a support to others, especially those who may be hesitating on their own journey. So thanks again so much for being here.
You bet.
All right, we are going to move on now to our third panelist, Michelle Padilla. Michelle, hi, Michelle.
Hi,
I'm
sorry.
gonna share a little bit about you and then we'll jump into the questions. So Michelle Padilla is an office technician with the California Department of Conservation. She is a former Department of Rehabilitation consumer and received job training, on-the-job coaching, and other employment support services to help her achieve her career goal of working for the state. Michelle has DiGeorge syndrome, or 22q11, which mirrors Down syndrome, and she is the producer and host of a podcast that increases awareness about her disability. Michelle graduated from Cal State Dominguez Hills with a bachelor's degree in human services. So I'm so glad that you are here to join us today, Michelle.
Well, thank you, Kim, for having me, and I'm glad to be here.
Great. So you were a consumer of the Department of Rehabilitation and received employment services from our department.
Yes.
Could you
go
share
ahead.
a little bit about how DOR helped you on your pathway to state employment?
Well, for me, growing up in LA, I could never get the services that I needed to get help. So once I was able to go to Harvard College, a friend of mine recommended me the LEAP program. So I got into the LEAP program, but at the time, the state had a hiring freeze, so I could not get myself into the state program. So I decided to go to college. And then from college, I went to Cal State Dominguez to get my degree. And I found out that they had a KDHR radio station. That's how I became the podcast. So during COVID, my family and I had to move up north to Sacramento. And so we had to find a place to live to be close to my family up here in case if anything were to happen to my mom and dad. I took a break from the part rehab and I decided that I wanted to get a state job. I no longer wanted to be on SSI. I figured if I get off SSI, then the state job is the next best thing for me to do. So I hooked up with State Disability Council. They helped me, guide me to Depart Rehab up here in Sacramento. And with their help, Depart Rehab gave me job training, job coaching, and I did not even know that they had that job coaching. And job coaching is something new that they started doing, which was, I think, back in 2000. So I did not even know that existed, and I'm very grateful for that. I have a job coach that comes up here 15 hours a week. So he sits with me and he asks me questions. And there are two training center up here that the Department of Rehab and Alta work with. So I'm also working with Alta Regional Center. They are providing me job training and transportation. So it is a struggle. I'm here 5 days a week. I commute up here. I love working at my job. I'm very grateful. So yeah.
So it sounds like you've really done a very good job at being able to piece together a lot of services. So between using the Department of Rehabilitation and the Regional Center and all of these different kind of almost like, you know, a constellation of different services that have been able to help you succeed. So can you tell us a little bit more about, you know, what it was like to go ahead and pursue employment and get off of SSI services? Because I know that that is a reason that a lot of people don't pursue employment with if they have a disability.
So many of you guys know, SSI tells you 3 times in a row that you qualify to work, you don't have nothing wrong, and they didn't see anything wrong with me. They didn't think I had a hidden disability or a learning disability. And so what happened was I went to a regional center in LA. They told me to take a genetic testing called FISH, FISH, that's FISH. So with that, I found out I got tested and I found out I had 22q11. Well, that changed to everything. So at the age of 30, in my 30s, that's when I found out that I had 22q11. And then when I finally went to the judge told SSI, you cannot look at that person with, you know, she has special needs, she is struggling. You need to see the whole picture and not just certain parts of picture. So with the help of the judge, I was able to get SSI. And then I wanted to find out more about 22q11. It is the second most common to Down syndrome. There are over 200 symptoms there. You have heart condition, you have learning disability, feeding problems, speech therapy, and you have schizophrenia. I've had 3 open heart surgeries. I've had 2 mouth surgeries, 2 sinus surgeries. And, you know, I was struggling. I wanted to get out of SSI. So a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, and my aunt told me about the LEAP program. And that's where I started to get more confident. And that's what I wanted to find about the services that were available. If anybody knows about the services in LA, you need to start asking for help. That's the bottom line, because nobody's going to telling you what to do. And I was struggling. I couldn't get anywhere. So when I went up to Oxnard, I met up with the State Disability Council, and that's how I was able to get off SSI. So it's the struggles and it's the weakness. A lot of people do not know this that services are available to them. I was one of them, and I'm here to tell you: ask for help, ask your family members, your support team, and ask them if there's any services and training and what other stipends you get.
All right. Well, I think that's great advice. So you have, you know, as you've mentioned a couple times now, an extremely rare disability that I think that you've now really brought a lot of awareness around through your podcast. So can you tell us a little bit more about your podcast?
Well, I started, like I said, I went to Cal State Dominguez, and I always loved radio. I always wanted to be on a radio. My favorite radio DJ was Vince Scully, Dodgers. So, and I'm like, I can listen to him for hours. I'm like, okay, that's something I could do. So I didn't have any contact at the time, and I didn't know what I wanted to talk about. So I figured, you know what, 22q will be my platform. And I created this team, and my team is still here to this day. I have been with KDHR since 2013. But again, when we moved up here, I broke away from KDHR, and I learned how to convert Zoom into video format, and I learned how to put it on audio as well. And my guest actually includes past guest Ryan Dibser. He is a Boston Red Sox coach. He started a foundation called 22q11. And then another comedian that I had was Bobby Collins. He has a special needs girl. And then we have celebrities like the late Don Wells. We had Marion Ross. We've had Dean Butler on the show. And we've had senators on the show. We have former mayors on the show. And sometimes I just reach out and say, hey, would you like to be a part of the awareness show? And we don't talk about politics. We do not like politics at all. It's just a fun show. And we have a lot of fun. I've been doing it next month. Actually, this month is our 13th anniversary. So
That's incredible. So if we wanted to listen to your podcast, Michelle, what is it called? And do you find it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you hear a podcast?
it's called the Awareness Show.
The
and you can-
Awareness Show.
Yes, I am wearing the logo that my graphic designer Maxie Rodriguez made. So we are on iTunes, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Spotify, Pandora, anywhere on social media. Like I said, we are open for interviews. We do not do anything with politics unless you guys have a cause. We can do that with you. We're on Pandora. So we have a lot of fun, and my team consists six of us. So it's a lot of fun. We do sometimes crazy and fun, stupid things. And like I said, it's going on 13 years this next week.
That's awesome, Michelle. Well, I appreciate you being here today and telling everybody about your experience at the state, your experience with job coaching and the supports that you've received in order to be successful at work, and what you also do outside of work. And I just noticed there was a question about the name of your podcast. Again, it's called The Awareness Show.
It's the Awareness Show, yes.
If you have and if you have a
can
link or something that you can put in the chat, that would be great.
I will do that right now. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Michelle.
You're welcome.
You're here and was able to share your journey with us today. So I'm going to move on now to our fourth panelist and final for today, who is my colleague here at the Department of Rehabilitation, Matt Morgan. So Matt is an IT supervisor here at DOR. He came to DOR 3 years ago to fill the role of Accessible Technology Specialist, and he came from the Community Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired, where he served as the Director of Assistive Technology. He is certified in JAWS, NVDA, and has years of experience instructing the others in the use of accessible technology. He now leads the team that tests documents, websites, and applications to ensure conformance with accessibility standards. Matt is a former technical director in theater who made a career transition due to his own progressive disability that impacts his vision. I can never say this word ever, I think, and there's several people that I work very closely with who have this disability. I think it's retinitis pigmentosa, but you can tell me if I'm wrong, Matt.
You got it right. And RP for short, just make it a lot easier. How are you doing today, Kim? Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Matt. So we're just going to dive right into the questions for you. So you took a pretty dramatic career transition, going from working in, more of a creative field, working in theater, to coming into working for IT. So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to make that career change?
Well, in essence, I've always been a creative person, and when it comes to working with accessibility and disabilities, you do have to have some creativity around how to accommodate and how to make things accessible. For me, when I was actually technical director at the theater, so I made sure that all of our equipment was up and running, that all of our computers were syncing, because our sound, our lighting, and our staging and our rigging, everything worked together. So it wasn't too huge of a leap, but at the same time, about 11 years ago, I found out I had an invisible disability myself. I finally got health care, went down to the ophthalmologist, and my ophthalmologist said, "Oh my gosh, you have RP, you're going to go blind someday." And she was like totally new, fresh and everything else, but she was totally excited because she looked inside my eye, saw the bone spiculing, and she was just said, this is what's going on with you. And It kind of hit me hard. I had a few years of dark times, but it turned out that my prior employer ended up finding out about my genetic disability. I was put on paid leave for almost a year while we worked through a reasonable accommodation process. Ultimately, they said, sorry, I'm going too fast for our captioners. Um, Ultimately, they said that they were not going to be able to accommodate someone who was blind to work in a dark environment. And I ended up being put on disability retirement, and reached out to the Department of Rehabilitation, and I started a case. Mostly at that time, it was to try to keep my old position. But as things progressed forwards, it didn't work out that way. And my counselor, huge shout out to Joe if he's on here, super great guy, kind of sat back and worked with me for, gosh, it felt like months. But he kept working through different opportunities, and I was on disability. I was retired. I was enjoying it. But at about 3 months in, I just kind of got over it and said, "All right, Joe, what do you got? Let's figure this out." And he's like, "Hey, I got a perfect spot for you. I know you don't know all this accessibility stuff. Oh, and a little bit of background. With retinitis pigmentosa, the likelihood I'm going to be totally blind is pretty high. So he wanted me to start learning about accessibility and learning about how to use a computer because I loved using computers all the time. And so he sent me off to the Community Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired for some training. But my knowledge set was a little bit higher when it came to computing, and because my visual acuity is still 20/20 for the 7 degrees of vision I have, um, it I really didn't find a need for it at the time. So he said, "You know what? I'm going to send you to some training and learn how to use this stuff even better and start working with individuals that need it, not necessarily yourself." So um, put me through that process, learned all about accessibility, learned all about screen readers and other accommodations through the computer age. Um, but Yeah, so that was that little portion. I worked there as a volunteer trainer, then I turned into the trainer, and then I turned into the director of assistive technology at the Blind Center. Um, while it's a nonprofit organization, and I love the people, and I still do volunteer work with them there today. Actually, we have our 75-year anniversary coming this next month, so if anybody wants the invite information, let me know. Um, we're having a party for it. But uh, where was I going with that? Oh, my counselor at the time who reached out to me and said, "Hey, we have an accessibility opening here at the department, and I know what you've been doing for the last 5 years. You want to give it a whirl?" I applied. I got the job. I became the accessible technology specialist, and I've had a great run doing that. So it's in life, everything has just kind of been happenstantial. And I can't say that anything bad can ever really happen as long as you're ready to put the best foot forward and move on to something new and learn something new every day. So that was a little bit how I came from being a technical director in theater moving into state service.
I never knew that whole story about how you came to state service, Matt, and I really love that because it's very different and yet very similar to my own story about coming to state service. You start out, needing different services or needing things due to your disability, and then you end up, working on them to help other people, even, if you need them yourself. So you kind of got a crash course in your own disability while learning how to help other people as well, which I think is really great and really valuable and a good way to make a disability into a marketable skill in some ways, because
Yeah.
I have a feeling that you probably would have stayed in theater had this not happened, like that this was.
My old 20-year goal was to run sound on Broadway. So yeah, I would have stayed in theater.
So it's interesting how sometimes life has other plans for us. So The world of accessible technology is huge and it's constantly evolving, and something that so many people can use and not necessarily everyone always understands. So how can other state employees learn more about assistive technology and stay up to date on these new changes and trends in technology that can maybe help them do their jobs better?
Well, there's a lot of places. I get a lot of my news from X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. There's dozens of channels out there and different organizations that push forward different technologies. Um, One of the new technologies that's coming out that recently came out, there's a half dozen companies that's making it now, but for the longest time, back in the 70s, we had a Braille display for those who are blind, that would be able to plug into a computer and you'd get a little line of Braille, so that way somebody would be able to read what was on a computer screen without an audio feedback from a screen reader. But now they're making them so that they're 2D. So you get a wide line of Braille cells and a tall line of Braille cells. And now you can display graphics for school kids, for engineers, for geologists. You can actually make all of these tactile graphics for people who are blind. Um, Newer things that are also coming out are these AIs that are able to transcribe and caption and help with cognitive disabilities, deafness. We were able to have an hour-long meeting, plug in an AI to it, and it's able to capture some key points. I know myself, I get a little bit of information overload from time to time, and I would love having access to that on a regular basis. But I would love for to make sure that people with cognitive disabilities have access to things like that. We have what's called the Web Accessibility Community of Practice that the Department of Rehabilitation hosts. And it's a group of almost 600 state employees now that get together. We have about 150 to 200 regular attendants. And we get through and we talk about things that have to do with digital accessibility, web accessibility, document accessibility. And not all of it's super cutting edge, just because we are the government space and we can't always go into those bleeding edge spaces. But we do have quite a huge array of very smart people in the room that have years of experience, even beyond me. Um, so I'm sorry, I'm looping back to your question. How can we learn more about this? So I think Cynthia is able to paste the link in the chat for us, but there is a link to our toolkit online if anybody wants additional information. But one of the places I've always found really beneficial to learn more about accessibility tools that are coming out is a conference, and it's down in Southern California. It's right outside of Disneyland this next year. It's every March, and it's called California State University Northridge's Assistive Technology Conference. So it's the CSUN AT conference. So that's a live where you get to go and put your hands on the new tech that's coming out. You can see what might be working for you. There's other assistive technology conferences. I've seen some in San Jose, some up in Sacramento, but this was all pre-COVID. But you can also find a lot of these organizations put out their information on YouTube, on X, on Facebook, and so other social media. New York's Accessibility Live, they have a podcast, which is actually a video cast. I don't know what they call that, but they do a monthly wrap up, and it's on YouTube. They basically host some really smart people that come in and talk about really smart things in the accessibility space. Perkins School for the Blind, they have they post new devices all the time, along with the American Printing House for the Blind. I'm sorry that I'm quoting a lot of blind-centric accessibility tools, but a lot of the times we find that when it comes to digital accessibility, the blind tools are the ones that find most of the problems first, and all the other tools are still using the same features inside of a computer to be able to access that information, whether it's a Braille reader or if you're zooming in on a page, making sure all of the text stays in one screen. Those all have to do with the same features, and most of my focus has been around the blind space, obviously, because I'm going to be blind someday. But I'll follow back to the conference. AxCon is another one of those conferences. It's offered by DeQ, which I believe is part of Utah, the University of Utah. But that's also another accessibility-centric convention. That one is free and online, so you don't have to travel anywhere. It also happens in March. Let's see. Yeah, I think that covers most of the where can we learn new things about accessibility.
There are lots of places, clearly. So
Yeah.
we did have somebody in the chat ask for a link to the Braille reader that you mentioned earlier. So if you could.
Well, I very much hesitate to give direct links to things, specifically because every piece of technology needs to be customized for the individual. So if you're looking for a different Braille display, Freedom Scientific is one that makes them. They have quite a few horizontal, just the regular Braille displays. I know that Humanware made the Monarch, which is another large name company, but they're the ones that made the one of the two-dimensional Braille displays. And then American Printing House for the Blind also was one of the first ones to develop that 2D Braille display, and that is called the Orbit, I believe. But that's by American Printing House for the Blind. And again, when it comes to technologies, you always want to make sure that the user is working with the technology and understands how to use it. Otherwise, it's going to go on a shelf and collect dust. You want to make sure that that technology is going to work for the person. Don't just buy it and say, hey, this is going to work for you. Especially with these two-dimensional Braille displays, they're like $40,000 to $60,000 a piece.
No, and I think that's such a great point, Matt, is that I think that for a lot of us with disabilities, people often will recommend things, or employers will just go buy something and thinking that you're going to use it. Like for years, people always tried to do back like 20 years ago, people were always trying to get me to use Naturally Speaking software and things like that. And it's not like talking into your iPhone today. It was much more archaic than that. And people would always, you know, make it be like, oh, you should use this. This will be helpful. And it's really, the individual in the end is gonna know what's best. And yeah, a lot of good technology is out there, but there's also technology that does sit on a shelf forever. So definitely a good point. So appreciate you sharing a little bit about your experience, Matt, and about all of the really great resources that we have out there. For people who have lost their vision or are in the process of losing their vision. So glad that you've been able to share some of that today and how it impacts you personally and the work that you do. So I know that we said at the beginning of this that we were not going to do any Q&A, but we've had some questions pop up. So we're going to bring Ben Parrish back on because somebody had a question about resources for people with non-visible disabilities. So the question was, can someone elaborate on the kinds of accommodations the state offers employees with non-visible disabilities? People often don't even know what they can ask for, so a few examples can be great. And Ben, before you answer, I'm just going to say that is so true about all of these things, whether it is technology if you're blind or visually impaired, or if it's something that you need for a non-visible. There's a lot of things out here and people don't always know necessarily what they can access. So Ben, can you speak a little bit to some specific ways that the state accommodates people with non-visible disabilities?
Sure. Thanks, Kim. And I think it was Max that asked the question. So I'm going to answer this in, I think, two ways. One, there is a great tool that I discovered when I started going through the RA process. It's through the Job Accommodation Network, or JAN, if people are familiar with that. And maybe Cynthia can put the link in the chat, but it is askjan.org/SOAR, SOAR. It's their searchable online accommodation resource. And so in this sort of search engine, you can search limitations, disabilities, work functions, and it will give you some resources on different things you might ask for, or just this kind of database of possible accommodations related to different disabilities. And then the second way I'll answer this is going to give you some specifics of my reasonable accommodation. I don't think I'm breaking any rules there, but a common one for Crohn's disease specifically is access to a restroom. And so a common accommodation that people can have, whether it's in the classroom or the workplace, is having a cubicle that's physically closer to a restroom than maybe some of the other cubicles. It can, you know, if you also have fatigue or issues related to that, it can be extra rest breaks or rest breaks that are flexible for your needs. And then I also mentioned that I recently was diagnosed with celiac disease. And the only treatment for celiac is maintaining a strict gluten-free diet. And so a reasonable accommodation for that condition is so when traveling for state work, it's important for me to prepare my own food. And when you're in a hotel that doesn't have a kitchenette or even just a sink, it's very difficult to do that sort of thing. And so a reasonable accommodation for someone with celiac might be hotel accommodations that have a way for you to prepare and store food that you can guarantee is gluten-free. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense for Max, and for others, I'm able to answer more questions.
No, I think that's really, really helpful, and even a few things that I learned as well. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
You bet.
So we are at time for our event today. So I want to again extend my extreme gratitude to all of our panelists today, Therese Taylor, Ben Parrish, Michelle Padilla, and Matt Morgan, for sharing your personal experiences, sharing your wisdom as you transitioned into being state employees. I want to thank everybody who was on here today for taking time out of your lunch hour when you could be doing so many other things, to learn about, you know, the things that we can do for people with disabilities in the state as a workforce. Really appreciate everyone being here today. And I want to thank my colleagues, Cynthia Butler and Sharon Comas from the Natural Resources Agency, also for their support in this webinar. And big thanks to our ASL interpreters for making this accessible for everyone today.